Nigel Inkster is a former deputy head of MI6, former director of operations and intelligence at the Secret Intelligence Service. Nigel, thanks so much for joining us this morning. How big a problem for the Ukrainians do you think the intelligence, the ceasing of intelligence, or at least the pause on intelligence sharing from the United States has been and is going to be?
Well, I think in the short term, it's obviously pretty serious, as we've seen from the attacks that have taken place in the last 48 hours. With the Ukrainians having much less capability to anticipate and intercept these attacks. And the other thing, of course, is that because the Ukrainians are now intelligence blind, it means they can't easily attack Russian targets. So basically, the Russians can move closer to the front line and get an advantage when it comes to planning and executing these attacks. Now, the question, of course, is how long this will last. The message coming out of Washington at the moment seems to be that this is a temporary phenomenon and may well be resolved within the next week or so. That remains to be seen, of course. But until such time as that coverage is resumed, the Ukrainians are going to be operating at a very significant disadvantage.
How big a fillip do you think it is for Vladimir Putin to hear the president of the United States basically legitimize what he's doing in terms of his attacks on Ukrainian civilians by saying it's something that anybody would do?
Well, it's clearly not helpful. I think in recent days, Vladimir Putin will have derived a lot of satisfaction from the developments that have been taking place around Ukraine. It seems increasingly probable that any solution, if one is indeed possible, would give him at least some, if not quite a lot of what he wants. I don't know where things will end up on issues like Ukrainian neutrality or disarmament. I think those are clearly off the table and unrealistic. But the fact that Russia is likely to be able to keep the territory that it has taken in the last 3 years seems more or less to have been viewed as a given.
Is it possible, perhaps not in the immediate term, but over the slightly longer term, is it possible for the UK and other allies to supplement or substitute, largely so, the intelligence losses from the US that Ukraine now is experiencing?
Again, in the immediate term, it's probably not going to be that easy because a lot of this material comes from a US owned and dominated satellite network, which no other European power is close to being able to replicate at the moment. So we're starting from a low base here. And the question is, who would do this and how it would be done if we had to try and replicate what the current American capabilities are. And would this be one or two nations collaborating on a kind of ad hoc basis, or would this be something that was organized more systematically and centrally? And if so, how? I don't think these issues have begun yet to be addressed.
Do you think we had Pat McFadden, the Cabinet Office Minister, on the show earlier on, talking about the need to revisit old assumptions about European security? Obviously, we've seen the president move repeatedly in a sustained way towards the Russian position on all sorts of matters. Now, however explicable that is, whatever the reasons for that are, many people are talking about this being a moment of strategic realignment. Does there come a point when we have to revisit or rethink, at least, our security relationship, our intelligence relationship, which is extensive with the United States?
I think the honest answer to that is yes. I don't think we're necessarily there yet, and I sense that the British government is making very sustained efforts to try and ensure that this relationship is maintained. Of course, we may be talking about two different things. The United States may have a very different view of its intelligence relationship with the United Kingdom and with other European countries. So that's an issue that remains unresolved. But I think at the end of the day, it is clear, the message is clear coming out of Washington, that Europe is going to be expected to take responsibility for Europe's security, and that's not just talking about the European Union. I think everybody's now got the message that Europe has to expend more resources to shore up its own security, and that's not just military, but it will also be in the intelligence domain. How that plays out, as I said, it's very difficult to know at the moment, but I think it is the case that old assumptions are going to have to be revisited.
How damaging, if we did get to a point where we had to substantially alter that intelligence relationship, whether it's Five Eyes or whatever it happens to be, how damaging would that be for UK security?
Well, in the short term, it would be very significant because if you look at the Five Eyes, a very significant amount of the intelligence that we rely on does come from facilities operated and owned by the United States. But it's not the case that we're completely without assets. I mean, Britain, for example, still owns geographically very significant bases in locations around the world. I'm talking about the sovereign base areas in Cyprus, the Chagos Islands, and so on. These are not inconsequential assets. France, too, has overseas assets that could potentially be developed to enhance signals intelligence collection capabilities. The one thing Europe will have to do in a much bigger way than previously is get into space. And of course, that is expensive and won't happen overnight.
Do you think there will be any concern at the top of the British security state about not only the United States moving closer to Russia in all sorts of policy areas, strategic areas, and so on, but is there a possibility they may even form closer intelligence sharing operations themselves? And what would that mean for us if they did?
Well, that would be obviously very unwelcome. I don't know whether that is going to be possible. I mean, experience suggests that the Russian intelligence and security services are very resistant to collaboration with anyone else other than on their own terms. So I don't think it would be entirely easy or straightforward to develop that kind of relationships. These are based on trust, and that trust takes a long time to build up. And at the moment, as between the United States and Russia, I simply don't think that it's there. So the likelihood of significant intelligence cooperation between the US and Russia in the short to medium term seems to be fairly remote.
The Prime Minister has said repeatedly, he's been quite unusual by comparison to other European leaders, of still insisting that President Trump and the United States is and will continue to be a reliable ally for the United Kingdom. Is that your assessment as well?
Well, I think it's an assumption worth continuing to work with until such time as we're confronted with incontrovertible evidence that that is no longer a realistic policy.
And what do you think that moment of rupture could be or would be? What would that represent?
Well, I think that would be, something very dramatic. U.S. Moving in a hostile way towards Canada, trying to reorganize or break up the Five Eyes relationship, something.
NATO withdrawal?
Sorry?
NATO withdrawal?
NATO withdrawal, yes. If it were a full-blooded NATO withdrawal, then of course that would be a trigger.
Nigel Inkster there, former deputy head of MI6.